Marcus Williams had been living on the streets for 6 months, but he'd never seen anything like what he witnessed that evening. When the well-dressed family approached the upscale cafe, something inside him snapped. "Stay away from that place," he called out desperately. Everyone thought he was crazy. No one realized he'd just prevented a tragedy that would have made national headlines. The autumn air in downtown Seattle carried the scent of rain and possibility as evening settled over Pioneer Square. The historic district buzzed with its usual mix of tourists, business people, and those who called the streets home. Among the latter was Marcus Williams, a 42-year-old black man whose life had taken an unexpected turn 6 months earlier. Marcus hadn't always been homeless. Until recently, he'd been a respected environmental engineer with a comfortable life, a nice apartment, and a future that seemed secure. But a combination of corporate downsizing, medical bills from his mother's cancer treatment, and a series of unfortunate circumstances had left him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a keen intellect that no one bothered to notice anymore. He'd learned to navigate the streets, to find shelter when the rain came, and to spot trouble before it found him. Most importantly, he'd learned to really observe the world around him in ways he never had when he was rushing between meetings and deadlines. That Tuesday evening, Marcus was sitting on a bench across from Bella Vista, one of the area's most exclusive restaurants. The establishment catered to Seattle's elite tech executives, wealthy retirees, politicians, and anyone else who could afford the three-figure price tags that came with being seen at the right place. Marcus wasn't there by choice. The bench was one of the few spots where security didn't immediately chase him away, and he was trying to stay warm while figuring out where to spend the night. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was watching people spend more on a single meal than he'd seen in weeks. As he sat there, something caught his attention. Through the large front windows of Bella Vista, he could see into the kitchen area. The restaurant's open concept design was meant to showcase the culinary artistry to diners, but from Marcus's vantage point, it offered a view that most customers never had. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the kitchen, a man Marcus didn't recognize was moving between the food preparation areas. This wasn't unusual. Restaurants had staff coming and going all the time. But something about this man's behavior was wrong. He moved furtively, looking over his shoulder constantly, and he was handling something that didn't belong in a kitchen. Marcus leaned forward, straining to see better. The man was wearing kitchen whites, but he moved like someone who didn't belong there. And what he was doing to the food made Marcus's stomach drop. The man was carefully adding something to multiple dishes, something from a small vial that he kept hidden in his jacket pocket. Not seasoning, not sauce, but something else entirely. Something that made Marcus's engineering mind immediately think of the chemistry courses he'd taken in college, the toxicology seminars he'd attended for his environmental work. Marcus had spent years studying contamination, understanding how dangerous substances moved through systems, how they affected human health. What he was witnessing looked exactly like deliberate contamination. His first instinct was to call the police, but his phone had been disconnected months ago. His second was to run into the restaurant and warn everyone, but he knew exactly what would happen. A homeless black man bursting into an upscale establishment would be seen as a threat, not a savior. As he wrestled with what to do, he saw a family approaching the restaurant's entrance. The father was well dressed in an expensive suit. The mother wore jewelry that probably cost more than Marcus used to make in a month, and their two teenage children looked like they'd stepped out of a prep school catalog. The Richardson family, though Marcus didn't know their names yet, was celebrating. Patricia Richardson had just been promoted to partner at her law firm, and her husband, David, a successful architect, had surprised her with dinner at Bella Vista. Their children, Emma and Michael, were excited about the fancy restaurant and the chance to dress up for a special evening. They had no idea they were walking into a nightmare. Marcus watched through the window as the mysterious man in the kitchen finished his work and disappeared through a back exit. Several dishes were now contaminated, and Marcus had no way of knowing which ones or how many people might be affected. The Richardson family reached the restaurant's entrance. That's when Marcus snapped. "Stay away from that place," he called out, jumping up from the bench and running toward them. The family stopped, startled by the sudden appearance of a disheveled homeless man. Other pedestrians turned to stare. A couple walking nearby moved protectively away. "Sir, please step back," David Richardson said firmly, moving in front of his family. "You don't understand," Marcus said urgently. "There's something wrong with the food in there. Someone just contaminated multiple dishes. You can't go in." Patricia Richardson's law training kicked in, and she studied Marcus's face for signs of mental illness or substance abuse. What she saw surprised her. His eyes were clear, his speech was coherent, and despite his appearance, he seemed genuinely distressed rather than delusional. "What are you talking about?" she asked carefully. "I was sitting on that bench." Marcus pointed across the street. "I saw a man in the kitchen adding something to the food. Something that's not supposed to be there. Something dangerous." Emma Richardson, 16 and idealistic, looked at her parents. "Maybe we should listen to him." "Emma, get back," her father said. Then to Marcus, "Look, I don't know what your game is, but we're not giving you money. Find somewhere else to panhandle." "This isn't about money." Marcus's voice rose, attracting more attention from passers-by. "I'm trying to save your lives." A security guard from a nearby building had noticed the commotion and was approaching. Marcus knew he had seconds before he'd be forcibly removed from the area. "Please," he said desperately. "I'm not crazy. I'm not high. I saw someone poison the food in there. Multiple dishes. You have to believe me." David Richardson was already moving toward the restaurant door. "Come on, family. Let's not let this ruin our evening." But Patricia hesitated. Something in Marcus's voice, in his eyes, made her pause. As a lawyer, she'd developed an instinct for when people were telling the truth, and every fiber of her being was telling her that this man believed what he was saying. "David, wait," she said. "Mom, seriously?" Michael, their 14-year-old son, looked embarrassed. "We're going to listen to some homeless guy?" "David," Patricia said more firmly. "Wait." The security guard reached them. "Is this man bothering you folks?" "No," Patricia said quickly before anyone else could answer. "We're just talking." Marcus looked at her with surprise and gratitude. "Ma'am, I know how this looks. I know what you're thinking. But I'm telling you the truth. Someone just contaminated food in that restaurant, and if you go in there and order the wrong thing—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air. Patricia made a decision that would save her family's life. "What exactly did you see?" Marcus quickly described the man in kitchen whites. The furtive behavior, the small vial, the way he'd systematically added something to multiple prepared dishes. "What did he look like?" Patricia asked. "White male, medium height, brown hair, probably 45 to 50. He moved like he didn't belong in that kitchen." Patricia turned to the security guard. "Could you call the restaurant and ask if they've had any new kitchen staff tonight? Anyone who wasn't scheduled to work?" The guard looked skeptical, but made the call. After a brief conversation, his expression changed. "They said they had a guy show up claiming to be from the temp agency, but when they called to verify, the agency said they didn't send anyone." The family exchanged glances. Patricia felt her stomach drop. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Left through the back about 10 minutes ago. Kitchen manager is checking the food prep area now." Rehook. But what the restaurant discovered in their kitchen would turn a family's dinner plans into a police investigation that reached the highest levels of law enforcement. Within minutes, sirens filled the air. The Seattle Police Department's hazmat team arrived, followed by the FBI, the health department, and what seemed like half the emergency services in the city. The investigation revealed that Marcus had witnessed something far worse than food poisoning. The substance that had been added to the food was a military-grade toxin that would have killed anyone who consumed it within hours. The contaminated dishes had been intended for a specific table, one reserved for a federal judge who had been receiving death. The man Marcus had seen was later identified as Thomas Crenshaw, a domestic terrorist who had been planning the assassination for months. He'd obtained kitchen uniforms, fake credentials, and detailed floor plan. If not for Marcus's intervention, Judge Harrison and his family would have died, along with several other diners who might have randomly received the contaminated dish. As the restaurant was evacuated and the investigation unfolded, the Richardson family found themselves at the center of a major federal case. But more importantly, They found themselves face to face with the man who had saved their lives. "I don't understand," Patricia said as they sat in a police station hours later. "How did you know? Why did you care enough to help us?" Marcus looked down at his hands. 6 months ago I had a job, an apartment, a normal life. I was an environmental engineer. I know about contamination, about toxins, about how dangerous substances behave. "What happened?" Emma asked softly. "My mother got cancer. Stage 4. The treatment was expensive, and my insurance didn't cover everything. I used up my savings, then took out loans. When she died, I was already behind on bills. Then my company downsized, and I lost my job. Medical debt collectors took everything." The family sat in stunned silence. "I ended up on the streets," Marcus continued. "Most people look right through me now, but I still see things. I still understand things. And tonight, I saw something that would have killed people." David Richardson, who had been quiet for a long time, finally spoke. "I owe you an apology. And more than that, you don't owe me anything," Marcus said. "I just did what anyone should do." "No," Patricia said firmly. "What you did was extraordinary. You risked being arrested, being attacked, being dismissed as crazy, all to save strangers." The FBI agent handling the case approached them. "Mr. Williams, we need to talk to you about what you witnessed. Your testimony is going to be crucial in prosecuting this case." Over the next few hours, Marcus provided detailed statements to federal investigators. His engineering background allowed him to give technical descriptions of what he'd observed that proved invaluable to the case. His attention to detail, his understanding of chemical processes, and his clear recollection of events painted a picture that helped investigators understand exactly what they were dealing with. Agent Sarah Chen, the lead investigator, was impressed. "Williams, your observations likely prevented one of the worst domestic terror attacks in Seattle's history. Judge Harrison has been working on several high-profile cases involving extremist groups. This was an assassination attempt." As the night wore on, the Richardson family couldn't stop thinking about the man who had saved them. When they were finally released to go home, Patricia made a decision. "Marcus," she said, "I have a proposition for you." He looked up warily. "Ma'am?" "I'm a partner at a law firm. We handle environmental law, among other things. We could use someone with your background and expertise." "Mrs. Richardson, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not offering you charity," she interrupted. "I'm offering you a job, a real job, with a real salary, doing real work that matters." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. You just proved that you have not only the technical knowledge we need, but also the character and integrity that are impossible to teach." David stepped forward. "And until you get back on your feet, you can stay in our guest house. It's not much, but it's warm and dry." Emma and Michael nodded enthusiastically. They had spent the evening listening to Marcus talk with investigators, watching him diagram chemical processes on whiteboards, explaining complex concepts with clarity and intelligence. The homeless man they had dismissed hours earlier had revealed himself to be one of the most intelligent and principled people they'd ever met. "I don't know what to say," Marcus said quietly. "Say yes," Patricia replied. "The world needs more people like you in positions where they can make a difference." 3 months later, Marcus Williams was back in his element. He had an apartment, a steady income, and work that utilized his expertise in environmental engineering. The Richardson family had become close friends, and Marcus often joined them for dinners at restaurants that had been thoroughly vetted by security. Thomas Crenshaw was convicted of attempted terrorism and multiple other charges, largely based on Marcus's testimony. Judge Harrison personally thanked Marcus for saving his life and the lives of other innocent diners. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The National Association of Environmental Engineers awarded Marcus their annual Hero Award, not for his professional work, but for his civic courage in the face of a crisis. Standing at the podium to accept the award, Marcus looked out at the audience of his professional peers. 6 months ago, I was invisible, he said. Society had written me off. People crossed the street to avoid me. But being homeless didn't make me less intelligent. It didn't make me less observant. It didn't make me less human. He paused, looking at the Richardson family in the front row. What it did was give me a different perspective on the world. It taught me that everyone has value, everyone has something to contribute, and everyone deserves to be heard. The audience gave him a standing ovation, but Marcus wasn't finished. There are thousands of people on our streets right now who have stories, skills, and insights that we're ignoring because of how they look or where they sleep. Maybe they can't all stop terrorist attacks, but they're all human beings with dignity and worth. Final rehook. Because sometimes the person society has forgotten is the one who remembers what really matters. That every life has value and that true character isn't measured by what you own, but by what you're willing to risk for others. The months that followed brought more changes than Marcus could have imagined. The story of the homeless man who prevented a terrorist attack spread across social media and news outlets nationwide. But rather than seeking fame, Marcus used his platform to advocate for homeless services and mental health support. He established a foundation that provided job training and placement services for homeless individuals with professional backgrounds who had fallen through society's cracks. The Richardson family became major supporters, and David's architectural firm donated designs for new transitional housing facilities. Patricia's law firm expanded their pro bono work to include cases involving homeless rights and discrimination. Emma Richardson, inspired by Marcus's story, changed her college plans to study social work. Michael started volunteering at homeless shelters and discovered a passion for community service that would shape his future career. The restaurant where the attack was prevented, Bella Vista, remained closed for several months during the investigation. When it reopened, the owners had implemented new security measures and created a program to provide free meals to homeless individuals in the area. They also installed a small plaque by the entrance reading, "In recognition of Marcus Williams," who reminded us that heroes come from all walks of life. Marcus often walked past that plaque on his way to work, but he never lingered. He understood that what he'd done that night wasn't really about heroism. It was about basic human decency. It was about seeing danger and acting to prevent harm, regardless of personal cost. The bench where he used to sit across from the restaurant was still there, and sometimes new homeless individuals used it for shelter. Marcus made it a point to check on them, to offer resources, and to remind them that their current circumstances didn't define their worth. Thomas Crenshaw was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During his trial, it was revealed that he had been planning similar attacks at other upscale establishments frequented by federal officials. Marcus's intervention hadn't just saved the Richardson family and other diners that night, it had prevented a series of attacks that could have terrorized the entire city. Judge Harrison, whose life Marcus had unknowingly saved, later wrote in his sentencing remarks, "The true measure of a society isn't how it treats its most successful members, but how it treats its most vulnerable." Miss Williams proved that heroism isn't about wealth or status, it's about character, and that character can emerge from the most unexpected places. Years later, when Marcus was asked about that night, he always gave the same answer. "I just did what anyone should do. I saw people in danger, and I tried to help. The real tragedy would have been if I'd stayed silent." But the Richardson family knew better. They knew that not everyone would have acted as Marcus did. Not everyone would have risked embarrassment, arrest, or worse to save strangers. Not everyone had the courage to speak up when it mattered most. Marcus Williams had been invisible to society for 6 months. But when it counted, when lives were on the line, he chose to be seen. He chose to matter. And in doing so, he reminded everyone who heard his story that every person has the potential to be a hero, if they're willing to act when the moment demands it. The next time you see someone that society has overlooked, remember Marcus Williams. Remember that intelligence and character aren't determined by circumstances. Remember that the person you dismiss today might be the one who saves your life tomorrow. And most importantly, remember that heroism isn't about having power or status. It's about using whatever power you have, even if it's just your voice, to protect others when they need it most. Sometimes the most powerful person in any situation is the one with nothing left to lose and everything to give. 2 years after that fateful night, Marcus Williams stood in his office at the Williams Community Center, a facility that had grown from the foundation he'd established with the Richardson family's help. The center provided job training, mental health services, and transitional housing for homeless individuals looking to rebuild their lives. Marcus often reflected on how that single moment of courage had changed not just his life, but the lives of countless others. The story of the homeless man who prevented a terrorist attack had inspired similar programs in cities across the country. More importantly, it had begun to change how society viewed homelessness, not as a personal failing, but as a systemic problem that required comprehensive solutions. The center's walls were covered with photos and letters from people whose lives had been transformed. There was Maria, a former nurse who had lost everything during a family crisis, now working as a medical assistant at the clinic. There was James, a veteran with PTSD, who had become the center's security chief. Each story reminded Marcus that everyone deserved a second chance. "Marcus, you have a visitor," said Rebecca Chen, the center's director. The visitor turned out to be Patricia Richardson, now a federal judge, who had come to discuss expanding the program to other cities. "I'm proud of you," Patricia said, looking around the bustling center. "But I'm not surprised. We saw your character that night, even when you had nothing." "I had everything that mattered," Marcus replied. "I had my conscience, my knowledge, and my humanity. Circumstances had just made those things harder for others to see." As they walked through the center's common area, Marcus pointed out the various programs in action. People were attending job training classes, working with counselors, and supporting each other through the challenges of rebuilding their lives. The Dignity First approach treated every client as a whole person with inherent worth rather than someone to be pitied. "The real measure of success," Marcus explained to Patricia, "isn't how many people we get off the streets. It's how many people we help remember their own worth and potential." That evening, the Richardson family gathered for dinner, a tradition they'd maintained since that night outside Bella Vista. Emma was now a social worker, managing the center's children's programs, while Michael had started a nonprofit providing legal services to homeless individuals. "You know what I think about sometimes," Michael said. "I think about all the people who walked past you on that bench, who saw you but didn't really see you. I wonder if any of them remember that the homeless man they ignored turned out to be the hero who saved lives." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I hope they do remember. Not because I want credit, but because I want them to remember that every person they walk past has a story, has value, has something to contribute." The conversation turned to the future. Marcus had been invited to speak at conferences about innovative approaches to homelessness. His center's model was being studied and replicated in other cities. But Marcus remained focused on the day-to-day work of changing lives. "The work is far from over," he told the family. "But every day brings new proof that everyone deserves a second chance, and that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone else has forgotten." As Marcus walked home that night, he passed the memorial garden that had replaced his old bench. The terrorist, Thomas Crenshaw, had been sentenced to life in prison, but the real victory wasn't in his punishment, it was in the lives that had been saved and the minds that had been changed. Marcus arrived at the center early the next morning to find a line of people waiting for service. Among them was a woman who had been a teacher before circumstances left her homeless, a man who had been a chef before PTSD ended his career, and a teenager who had aged out of foster care. Each of them was more than their current circumstances. Each had potential that society had overlooked, and each deserved the chance to rebuild, to contribute, and to be seen as a whole person worthy of respect and opportunity. Marcus rolled up his sleeves and got to work. There were lives to change, systems to fix, and minds to open. Sometimes the most powerful person in any situation is the one with nothing left to lose and everything to give.